All right, so we're diving deep today into VR and what it might tell us about ourselves.
Yeah.
We've got this article here called Pseudoscience or Cutting Edge Science. If you love VR, you've already decided. And it's a pretty interesting one. It really gets you thinking.
Yeah, it really does. It asks this question about why are so many people who love VR, which is all about, tricking the brain so quick to dismiss things like the placebo effect or hypnosis as pseudoscience.
Yeah, like it's a weird disconnect, right?
Right.
Because the article has these examples like when you're in VR and you like duck to avoid virtual bullets.
Yeah.
Or, your heart's racing because you're running away from zombie.
Absolutely.
It's not real, but your body's reacting like it is.
Exactly. And VR gives you this really tangible way to experience how belief can shape what you experience. Like, it's not just an intellectual thing. It's visceral. It's a bodily response.
Yeah.
It's when our pulse quickens or we flinch away from something in VR that we see the power of belief in action.
It makes you wonder what else we might be missing or dismissing just because we don't experience it as strongly as we do in VR.
Exactly. And that's where the article's comparison to pseudoscience comes in. Things like the placebo effect, where if you believe in a treatment, it actually causes physiological changes. Or, phantom limb pain being treated with VR, where the visual feedback and sensory feedback helps to rewire the brain.
Oh, yeah. I find that stuff really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like VR is almost like a bridge between the mental and the physical.
Right.
Like it's allowing the brain to create a new reality and to reduce suffering.
Absolutely. And by creating these very controlled environments and repeatable experiences, VR is like this amazing tool for studying all this in a way that traditional science hasn't really been able to.
Yeah.
Like, think about it. We can change different things in VR, measure people's responses, and start to really understand how belief and perception and physical changes are all connected.
Okay, so we're seeing VR is showing us how powerful belief can be. But how do we go from these subjective experiences to, like hard science?
Right.
And that's where the challenges of studying belief come in.
Exactly. Belief is, by its very nature, subjective. It's different for everyone. It's hard to measure, and the mechanisms behind it are still poorly understood. So traditional scientific methods, which need things to be objective and repeatable, they really struggle with the nuances of belief and its effects.
That makes sense. But the article seems to say that VR could actually be the key to figuring all this out. How?
Well, VR lets us make really consistent experiences that can be, changed and controlled.
Yeah.
We can isolate specific things and measure physiological responses really precisely.
So you're saying we could design VR experiments to test how belief affects things like pain.
Exactly. Imagine comparing how people react physically to a very realistic VR simulation of something painful versus a more cartoonish, less immersive one. By controlling the level of realism, we could start to see just how much belief impacts the experience of pain.
That's amazing. So VR basically becomes a lab for studying the mind. What other research possibilities does it open up? What else could we explore with this?
Oh, the possibilities are really exciting and honestly a little overwhelming. We could study how different virtual environments affect stress levels. We could see if we can enhance placebo treatments with VR. We could even investigate how interacting with people virtually changes our emotions and behavior. There's huge potential for groundbreaking discoveries in fields like psychology, neuroscience, even philosophy.
Wow,
It's really quite amazing.
It sounds like VR is really pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible.
Absolutely. And that's where this whole idea of VR as a bridge between like the mental and the physical gets really interesting. We're seeing it with those therapies you mentioned. But it could go way beyond just treating specific conditions.
You mean VR could change how we think about the mind-body connection entirely?
Yeah, exactly. Like traditional science has often tried to keep mind and body separate, study them on their own. But VR lets us explore how they work together in a way that we never could before. We can actually see how thoughts and beliefs cause physical reactions, how virtual stuff triggers real feelings in our bodies.
It challenges that old idea that the mind and body are totally separate things.
Exactly. And it makes us rethink how much power the mind has to shape our reality. We're not limited to just watching people's behavior or listening to what they say they feel anymore.
Right.
We can actually measure the physical effects of mental states in a very controlled way.
This takes me back to what the article said about comparing VR to those so-called pseudoscientific things. If VR can show us this clearly, how the mind affects the body, does that make those other areas we've kind of dismissed maybe worth another look?
That's a big question the article asks. It's not saying that everything labeled as pseudoscience is suddenly proven true,
Right.
but it does suggest that maybe we don't understand the mind and what it can do as well as we thought. Maybe there are things happening that we just haven't been able to measure or explain with our current scientific tools.
It's like VR is showing us a whole new level of reality where the mental and physical kind of blend together.
Yeah, and it's often in those blurry in-between spaces that the most exciting discoveries happen. Think about the history of science. So many breakthroughs were met with skepticism at first because they challenged what people thought they knew.
Yeah.
We might be on the verge of a similar shift in how we understand the mind and what it's capable of.
It's kind of exciting. Yeah. A little scary, right? Like
Yeah.
realizing that our understanding of reality might be way more flexible than we thought.
Definitely. And that's why it's so important to think about the ethics of all this. As we go deeper into this world of virtual experience and how it affects us mentally and physically, we have to be really careful, thoughtful, and have strong ethical guidelines.
I'm curious what you think about the bigger implications of VR's success. The article says it could mean we need to reevaluate what we think about belief and its potential.
It's a really interesting idea. What if belief isn't just a passive thing in our heads, but an active force that shapes how we see things, what we experience, even our physical bodies? Like VR shows us so clearly.
What if we've been underestimating the mind this whole time?
What if instead of just writing off certain things as pseudoscience, we look at them again with a more open mind and use tools like VR to explore them in a controlled and ethical way?
That's a pretty bold idea.
Yeah.
It would mean really changing how we think, being willing to step outside our comfort zones and be okay with not knowing everything.
And maybe that's exactly what VR is pushing us to do, to question our assumptions, to push the limits of what we understand, and to unlock the incredible potential of the human mind.
Yeah, it really feels like we're at the edge of something big here. Like
Yeah.
VR isn't just a cool tech thing. It's making us rethink some really fundamental stuff about ourselves.
It is a powerful idea that something that seems, at first glance just about entertainment or escaping reality could actually help us understand the human mind so much better.
And I think that's what makes this article so cool. It's not afraid to ask the big questions.
That's right.
It really makes you reconsider what you think is possible, what's real, and what we might have just dismissed too quickly without really looking into it.
Yeah, the article's conclusion really makes you think.
Mm-hmm.
It asks if we're ready to accept the science behind what some people might still call magic. And I think that's something we all need to think about as we go further into this new world of VR and virtual experience.
It reminds me of that quote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we're at a point now where the line between science and what we used to think of as magic is starting to blur.
And if that's true, we need to be ready to approach these new possibilities with excitement, but also with a healthy dose of skepticism. We need to stick to the scientific method, but also be open to expanding what that method can include.
So where does this leave us? What can our listeners take away from all this about VR and what it means for understanding ourselves?
I think the biggest takeaway is that VR has shown us in a really concrete way how powerful belief is in shaping our experiences.
Yeah.
And if that's true in the virtual world, it makes you wonder how much more powerful belief might be in shaping our everyday lives, our health, our relationships, even how we see the world around us.
It's a challenge, for sure, to be open to things we might have rejected before, to question our assumptions, and to be curious about these things instead of judgmental.
Yeah, and maybe that's the most profound thing about VR's success. It's not just about the technology itself. It's about the invitation to explore, to question, and to embrace the amazing untapped potential of the human mind.
This journey of discovery, and it seems like VR is giving us an incredible new map for that journey. So to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that VR headset handy. You never know what amazing things you might discover about yourselves and the world around you.